grew, I began to grow in areas and be better at football. And football was the one that gave me fulfillment. I played ball, and that's where I got the attention and the affirmation. And it was deep though, Jay, because I got it from the public and the community, but I still was lacking the void from my dad. In my childhood coming up, I was one of those guys that was just looking to be affirmed, approved, and celebrated by my dad in particular, but other people as well. And because my father had an addiction, an alcohol addiction, it really interrupted our bond.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Releasing Pressure podcast. I'm your host, as always, Antoine Johnson. And today I am joined by a special guest, Mr. Pastor Reggie Cox, based out of Rochester, New York. But why don't you go jump right in, Reg, and introduce yourself for the people?
Sure. My name is Reggie Cox, and I am the executive director of Fatherhood Connection, father of 10 kids, one just transitioned, and 20 grandchildren. And so I'm excited to be here with my man, Antoine. I call him Jay. And it's a pleasure just to see what God is doing in his life today.
Yeah. Oh boy, I got some other stuff going on over here, Reg. Anyways, no, I'm really honored to have you on the call. I think back to the time, around time when I first got started in this work, which was back in 2017 now. And, I just remember going through your Fatherhood Connection program, and that being a very pivotal or turning point in my life. God really used that program and you and Tommy to help really change my trajectory. And so, but before we even get into that kind of stuff, I want to hear from you. What was life like for you, kind of growing up, right? Like you do a lot of work, right, around manhood, and like I kind of want to get to know more of the origin story of Reg.
So yeah, thanks for asking, Jay. Well, my it's kind of like my daddy story, right? In my childhood coming up, I was one of those guys that was just looking to be affirmed, approved, and celebrated by my dad in particular, but other people as well. And because my father had an addiction, an alcohol addiction, it really interrupted our bond. And so I used most of my childhood. I don't really remember a lot of my childhood because it was very traumatic, and it was a lot of abuse, domestic violence, controlling environment, and stuff like that. Today's my dad is my hero, but during that time, we really didn't know how to connect. I didn't know how to connect with them, and so as I grew, I began to grow in areas and be better at football. And football was the one that gave me fulfillment. I played ball, and that's where I got the attention and the affirmation. And it was deep though, Jay, because I got it from the public and the community, but I still was lacking the void from my dad. And so I began to struggle with understanding my own identity because the very thing that I wanted to hear my dad say, that's my boy. That's my, he got it going on. He got what it takes. But when I didn't get that, I began to sense that belonging, that acceptance, that attention from people in the community. And I think that kind of made me become like a people pleaser, rescuer, enabler, and all that good stuff. And so that was kind of like what my childhood was like. And then after I got through the football piece, I think I began to long for the affirmation of a male figure. And I think that's what kind of started this ball on the road.
Wow, and that is the term. That's where the term father hunger comes from.
Yes, yes.
Okay, could you unpack that a little bit? Like, so now it is kind of hitting me again because I was
Yeah.
actually going through some stuff and I saw one of your slides and I'm like, man, I got to see how Reg is doing. And so, but unpack that for us. Like, what is father hunger and everything?
Yeah, so the father hunger is really twofold. One section is because you're my seed, the father longs to be connected, even though his behavior speaks opposite. right? He may be disconnected. He may go into other addictions. He may become a workaholic. He may begin to be driven in other areas to keep his focus and his conscience off of the very thing that he birthed into the world. And so that's the longing from the father's end to the child. But then is that other side where the child longs to be connected with the father. And so that child, no matter what that's going on there, he's gonna always want to know who my daddy is, right? What was he like? Why didn't he want me? Kind of go back to my classic movie with Will Smith father scene, right? After all that, I'm angry and I'm all this going on, but why don't he want me? And so we find that across the nation, there are many children still trying to answer that question of why don't my dad want me? Where is he at? Why would he abandon me? Why would he leave me? And so it's that void that we're talking about and that father hunger, that wound that's left in one person. And that's why we really go, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but we talk about the father's heart, turning the father's heart back to the children and the children's heart back to the father, unless this curse will be upon the land. So it is we see that.
So that's a good segue into that's what from the book of Malachi, right?
Yes.
And you being a pastor, right? Like, but you also like what we consider like the fatherhood guru in this space. Talk to us about like the intersectionality of maybe specifically your faith walk and the work.
Yeah, good question. So in my struggle to just address my own identity and my low self-esteem, and as long as I got the attention from again the community, Reggie was all right, But then there was that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde piece that went on because when I went home, I was in this norm of chaos and domestic violence and dad beating mom and hollering and controlling. And so we do what we call the keep, toss, add. What things would I keep about my dad? Toss and add. Well, I would keep his work ethic, right? But I would toss his controlling nature and the addictions and how he was physically there, but he wasn't emotionally, socially. I wouldn't know, he was unapproachable. And so this is how it began to drive the father work for me because I realized that I wasn't by myself, Jay, that it was so many other men and daughters. We're not even talking about the daughters yet, but there's so many other children that long for the affirmation from a father. I can do well, and you can give me praise, and other guys in the fathers group can praise me or say, Reg, you did your thing. But man, it ain't nothing like what my dad said, It does something different. It causes a leaping on the inside. And so that spiritual piece really began to not be just the pastor in the church. And I realized then I'm the church, and then I'm sent like an apostolic anointing. I'm sent to a people, and these will probably be the people that don't come to the church. And so that's where we begin to address probation and CPS, Child Protective Services, and recovery agencies, and anything that makes up the community that becomes then my audience and my targeted location to work with men and families.
Wow, that's powerful. You're making me think about I was in service this past Sunday and Pastor Tommy, he said something. I'm pulling it up now because it was really eye opening. Oh, here it is what he said. He says, wherever God sends you, that becomes your place of ministry.
Come on.
It kind of speaks to exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, yes. I really believe that I you kind of messing with me now because that was a topic that I addressed this past Sunday. So I have a faith culture that I go into the churches and do those workshops in there as well. And we talk about in 2025, I'm going to learn how to thrive. Or I'm going to thrive in 2025. And what does that really mean? It goes back to the place that I'm planted. Where I'm at is where I was planted. I'm like the atom that the environment was created before I got there. But now he planted me in that environment, right? And then he had the four rivers. All four rivers really have a meaning. And they begin to design a fruitfulness, an increase, a development. It gives me my environment to expand and to grow and to increase and to multiply. I got to dress it. I got to cultivate it. So watch this, Jay. All of us have a garden. Now I got to work it. We're not talking about agriculture. We're talking about being able to discover the gift you are in the place you've been planted. And so those are the things that we address as you're talking about, even what Tommy was speaking of. Now we have to be able to cultivate and discover who's our nation, who's the people that we are to connect with. And usually it deals with the wound that's been so branded in your heart. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. It kind of it speaks to what you also talk about a lot in the group, or not a lot, but every now and then you'll talk about the assignment of every man and father. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so usually I look at it from this perspective, and this is where I think I got revelation for it. Is that usually the opposite side of your pain is your promise. So again, going back to the garden experience, the thing that was so painful, I call it the trauma. The trauma is an indication that there's an assignment if I can survive it and then be able to thrive in it. And so, in other words, the thing that went to try and stop me and to kill me is the thing that I've now realized that revenue comes through that, promise comes through that, benefit comes through that. I can relate to other people who have gone through what I've gone through because I'm not only a survivor, but I realize I got the t-shirt, I got the hat. And so now, watch this. I become a voice. I become encouragement. I become motivation for people who are going through similar things that I've gone through. And so that's really where we talk about, being planted and on our assignment, right? Sometimes the assignment is ugly and it's painful and it's hurtful, right? But on the other side of that, when you realize that you're being empowered, usually in assignments, in the dirt, in the struggle, in the challenges, it's gold there. But we have to wipe it off. We got to get dusted off. And we need people. That's why it's important for brethren to dwell together, and why I believe the enemy works so hard in keeping us apart, because in that's where the blessing is commanded.
Yeah, wow. You briefly touched on something and then kind of pull back out of it, but I want to talk a little bit about not necessarily relationships, but women as it relates to fatherhood. And it's funny I say relationships. So my wife and I still to this day, we sat in a one-on-one workshop, which we had a workshop for the entire community. Nobody came, so we had our individual counseling session, if you will. And you use the term, what was it? Oh my goodness, it escapes me now. It's intense
Yeah.
fellowship. And so now when we have our little disagreements or whatever, or even when I'm in other spaces with other men, I'll use that term, and it just they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna borrow that now. I'm like, oh, go ahead, because I didn't borrow it 20, 50 times from Pastor Reg. So but talk to us a little bit about how you see father hunger or father wounds or whatever you want to speak to in women, and how that kind of manifests itself in relationships later on.
Yeah. So when we address, that's a great question, and I'm not one that say I have all the answers to it, and I'm still discovering strategies that really empower, engage, and encourage other people. But I do know that whatever I've gone through as a child, some of the trauma there and in my adolescent stages, it impacts me in my adult relationships. Right. So I'll go back, and those things that trigger me, those things that causes me to become fearful or to become doubtful or to even not trust, right? If those issues are relevant in our adult relationships, and so it's important for the father to really be able to get a sense of trust and belonging with his daughter, right? Because usually she's going to pick a man like her dad, right? And it's rather the good, the bad, and the ugly, Jay. And so it's important for us to be able to become the best version of ourselves, because she's gonna pick somebody like you. In most cases, she's gonna look for a man like you. And so it's important for us to be able to look at how not only is she beautiful on the outside, but she's beautiful on the inside. So speaking into her about her gifting and about the talent she is, and about how she need boundaries, and she need to be able to
Hmm.
understand that she's a beautiful plant all by herself without even anyone telling her that. She needs to hear it from her father. And she needs to see the unconditional love regardless of the mistakes that she makes. So it's really difficult when she has not had that. She'll look for a father figure in her marriage. She'll look for a man to meet watch this, the unmet need. Oh my God. What are the unmet needs? Rather it be in the daughter or the son, we all have them. You can have a father there and still have unmet needs, but we don't discuss it. This is why the father support groups and it's coming together to be able to talk about what is an unmet need is really relevant today, because we'll begin to make someone in the relationship responsible for meeting the unmet need, and they'll never be able to do it.
You're preaching good. You're preaching good. It's funny, actually. I am a part of a group, a small group, part of a church. My wife and I were part of this past year, and we meet every Thursday. And it originally started off with these guys a couple years back around, pursuing sexual purity.
Mm,
And in the church, folks don't like talking about this a lot, but a lot of men struggle with pornography
yes,
addiction or stepping out on their partners and all the sorts of things, right? That we don't ever talk about them. But one of the purposes for this group is for us to be able to talk about times that we're either struggling with things or then fail or whatever the case may be, so that we can come back to a place of walking not only in righteousness but having accountability and community, right? And so where was I going with that? But one of the books that we were kind of reading together, we put a pause on it recently, but it was called Boundaries in Marriage by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Henry Cloud. And in it, they talk about kind of exactly what you're speaking to in terms of, understanding that we may be responsible for our responsible to our significant others, but we're not responsible for them in the sense that they have things like what you're just talking about that although we're in relationship, there are just some things that we are not responsible for, right? Like we could love on our spouses, we can all these things, but at the end of the day, they have to, one, right? Like that's why it's important folks to have a relationship with God themselves, so that they don't look for their spouse to be all things to them, right?
yes,
That is super stressful to put on anybody
yes.
to look to them to be your everything, right? You know how people say, "Oh, they're my everything." Well, that's a lot of pressure, right?
It is. It
And
is.
very few, if anyone, can be someone's everything. They could be an idol, a crutch in your life. They could be a lot of things, but you really can't be somebody's everything, right? But the point that I'm making here is that in this book they talk about like the boundaries, right? Boundaries and relationships, and this just so happens to be specifically about boundaries in the context of marriage. So, but what you just spoke to had me thinking about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's powerful, and I think there needs to be more discussion about those boundaries and about the unmet needs. Because many times you can be crying and expecting someone to pick up what the unmet need is, but you never had a voice or knew how to voice it in a way that wasn't demeaning or wasn't attacking or being
Mm,
aggressive to the other spouse or the relationship, the other partner in the relationship. So you make them responsible of them trying to figure out what's wrong with you, but I've never learned how to talk about it in a way where I'm not pointing the finger and blaming. So now we're talking about communication styles and blockers to communication, because I've never learned how to communicate effectively enough where I take ownership for how I feel. Oh my God. So that's a whole nother piece that we'd have to unpack, because the truth is, Jay, I'm 65 this July, and I'm still discovering areas and flaws in my ability to communicate what's really going on. Right. And so again, now trust has been there. We've been married 31 years, and I'm still yet learning that I can be more effective in my communication. I can be more effective when to speak and when not to speak, right? When is the right time? Okay, so the wisdom and the strategy that's needed is vital moving forward. So all of this plays a factor when it talks about marriage, when it talks about relationships, when it talks about even getting older and pornography and erectile dysfunctions and all of those other things men don't talk about. You know what I mean? So how then do I still please my wife when I have a problem not being able to have my manhood stand? So it's
mm,
really big issues that the church don't want to talk about it. So we have to learn how to talk about it in our support groups, right?
Yeah.
And in places that men will learn to be open and honest. And so I think it's huge as we go and delve in the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing collectively.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're preaching good. I think this is a good segue into how you often would talk. Well, I'll say this before I go into that. You use the word trust, and one of the things that that's always stuck with me after going through your group is how you would say how trust is built with consistency over time. I love
Yeah,
that, right?
you
It
remember
makes so
that,
much
right?
sense. Yeah, and one of the other ones that I heard around trust is also powerful. They say trust is. Um, Gained in droplets and lost in gallons,
Wow,
right?
I
And
like
that
that.
it's hard to build trust sometimes, right, with people because folks have trust issues, folks have daddy issues, folks have traumas and things, triggers that and so it's hard to, you have to be consistent over time. But when you do something to break somebody's trust, I mean, it's like it pours out, right? And it can be so hard to come back to that place. But I wanted to talk or see if you would talk a little bit about like the little boy within, the little girl within. We just got finished talking about like the relationship aspect, but I always loved when you talked about that the little boy within concept, because you have a whole totally different spin on it that I think is really therapeutic.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I really appreciate that. I'm honored. So many people in this field that are so much more profound than I am, and for it to be considered that is essential to be able to have these conversations is awesome. But we address the boy as a little 2-year-old toddler, right? That he's selfish and he's self-centered. There are times when I need to be the boy, but I can't let him stay out there and play all day long because he'll cause me to repeat myself. And so my life is like a vapor. And so I don't have a long time to really be able to repeat myself over and over and over again. So I got to really be able to address the fact that Reggie doesn't know how to deal with sometimes when he's hurt or when he's frustrated or when he's discouraged. And so I'll disconnect. Now usually there's that fight or flight feature, but many times we'll find that men in particular that we'll either just disconnect. We cut everybody off. We go into our man cave and we don't really know how to work it out. We don't know how to talk about it. And if you got a wife who needs closure, right, then she really is struggling trying to reach us. And so it's important when we talk about the boy, not only being the 2-year-old toddler and selfish and self-centered, but being able to interpret the boy's cry. And some of the problems I've had is interpreting, Reggie, you're depressed right now. Reggie, you're mourning right now. Reggie, you're going through the stages of grief right now. And so being able to openly talk about that, because I did not talk about it with my natural dad. I didn't talk, watch this, I didn't talk about that, don't talk about it with my spiritual dad. So who do I talk to when I'm grieving, when I'm experiencing loss, when I'm hurting? Where's my go-to? And so many guys don't have a platform or a vulnerable, I call it a vulnerable and a transparent environment where they can be transparent and vulnerable and then be clapped and awarded and affirmed for being there. Right? And so reinterpreting the cry is that I don't need to see water come down my eyes, but I need to hear the tone. I need to hear the hurt. I need to see the pain, the agony, right, of my struggle. And so to me, that's so needed in the places that we are in today, in our spaces that we're in, as we relate to men and how we deal with the boy. And then the man becomes more responsible. He understands it that, look, man, I got to be responsible for my own feelings. I got to be able to identify. I got to be able to identify, validate, and process my emotions. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I still struggle in these areas, right? When
Listen.
I'm feeling some kind of way, I look at who you made me and no, Reg, I got to correct that paradigm. There needs to be a shift. No one made me feel a certain way.
Mhm.
Right, but I chose that. Now, why did I keep choosing a place to be hurt then? And so I haven't learned how to change my perception oh my God, to reinterpret or to unlearn some stuff that's penetrated in my soul, in my soulish issue. There is the trigger for me to go back. And so it's like when something happened, I put it in the file cabinet and I store it. And now when anything that looks like that same feeling, I go back in that file cabinet, pull that drawer out and repeat it all over again. And so these mental tapes play by themselves. I don't have to push play. What I have to do is to be able to stop the play. And that's hard by itself. And so sometimes I have to catch that thing, right? And bring it back into place to arrest that so that I don't have to go on and continue this pattern. Because watch this, whoever loves me, they're getting a dose of that. I'm training them, whether I realize it or not. And this is the struggle and the challenges sometimes about the patterns that need to be broken in our families, right? And so I think it's important for us to be able to acknowledge these things, right? Like you said, trust is consistency over time. I got to be able to trust again. I got to be vulnerable enough to risk, because you can't love somebody unless you're vulnerable. And you can't really truly love them, right? Because it's gonna mandate you to be vulnerable, mandate for you to feel what you feel, and unconditionally still forgive, unconditionally still reach, unconditionally really still to present yourself in a way that really can be taken advantage of. And so these factors are important when we talk about the boy, the man, and the patriarch. And the patriarch is the one that realizes that he's not just then a father figure to his own children or his grandchildren. He realized that he's a father figure to a region. A father figure to a territory, that there's a certain amount of grace and help and support that is necessary for me to be able to affect a region, a territory. It's like planted to prosper. I find that I'm wherever I'm at. And Jay, should be good for you right here. Wherever you are and how you've been planted now, you're designed to prosper, right? And there's going to be a new discovery, a new creative design, a new strategies that needs to be used in order for you to reach the mass, right? And to max out your potential. And so I speak into you, man, that this is your season to thrive like never before. And even in the transitions that you don't understand, there's a help available.
You prophesying now.
Right.
What? Listen, we don't got no collection plate tonight, man. No, this is really good though.
Yeah.
I so appreciate that. Yeah, it's powerful stuff. Especially when you think about guys who just not in these spaces or having these conversations. You talked about the patriarch piece, and it didn't convict me, but I was convicted about 2 weeks ago because one of my wife's good friends, had asked me to come into the life of her nephew, and I was like, hey, yeah, cool. I'm like, I know it's not gonna be all cakewalk because like you said, the trust factor, right? Especially if folks who have been wounded by other people in their lives, particularly men, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I got it, and I had some experiences with them where I'm like, man, like this is a tough guy to get through, right? Like 13, right? Like I've been 13 before, but it's been a while, and so I'm like, I didn't realize how much this would take. And so I was talking to my mother one day recently, and she was like, she also began to like, speak it to me, and she's like, listen, you can't treat this young person any different than you would treat any of your children.
Come on.
Like he is called to be in your life, forever amount of time. And it's like, that is not always easy to do. Right.
Yes.
Like I know how to deal with my kids. Right. I'm,
Yes.
I'm their
Yes.
father. I know how to deal. But when you have to have a measure of patience and grace and
Tolerance.
understand tolerance, all those things for folks who are not necessarily belong to you and who are going to have some resistance, right?
Yes.
Because they don't really know you like that, and I understand that, but it's easier said than done. And so no, I so appreciate you speaking to that whole patriarch piece, right? Because that's where I hope to get to at some point in my life, Lord willing. I know that we're coming toward the end, and so one of the things that I want to ask you, that I would ask most folks on here, is how do you or what would you suggest for men to release pressure, right? And I say release pressure. You've been there, right? Like in a space where you got young kids and maybe they're not yet out the house yet, and all this stuff, and you're trying to be a husband and a provider. Maybe I don't, I know you're in ministry, so maybe you're pastoring at that time. All this stuff, can you think back to how you navigated that season of your life with all the different moving parts?
Yeah, that's $1 million question, Jay, and I don't think that there's no one certain way that you do that. I think that you look at levels of maturity within yourself. First of all, learning how to just still breathe and not fear, not let the circumstance overtake you, right?
Hmm.
And so being able to be still and to rest. And this is not just a spiritual principle, and it's not just a scripture that I'm talking about, because even scripture without faith to it, you still ain't gonna move nowhere. And so it's important for me to be able to understand that to release the pressure. First of all, I'm that balloon, right? I'm that balloon that you blow air in, and then when you release that balloon, I'm going crazy. That is my normal tendency of how I cope. And so now I'm learning how to, instead of me going all over the place, I'm learning to ask for help. The thing that I think that most of us really struggle with is asking for help. We don't, that's too vulnerable. I got this. I'm
Yeah.
independent. I'm a provider. I know how to fix things. But the truth is, I don't know how to fix this. And being able to be humbled enough. So humility gives you access to the strategy that you need for the season you're in. And if I don't allow humility and embrace that as my tutor, then I'll keep going over the same thing. I don't know about Jay. I've been, man, some things I just over and over. And I mean, at the
Mm-hmm.
time, humility wasn't the thing that I was looking for, but it presented itself. And so now learning how to be mature enough to embrace humility, meaning, you know what? I don't have an answer. I need help. I'm reaching out, right? The
Yeah.
more I reach out for help, right? He's a present help in the time of trouble. Now, a lot of times I don't talk scripture and use quotes like that in my workshop. Most of them don't even have a relationship like that in the faith
Hmm.
community. But I can do that here. But my point is that even if I'm not in church or don't have a faith or don't believe in God, I still got to learn how to ask for help. And I think
Yeah.
this is the thing that causes us to stay stuck, right? There's going to come a time on life's journey for me to ask for help. So the release pressure begins with looking for an opportunity to release my frustrations and my emotional garbage, right? On somewhere. I need to vent. And I can't vent by the porn. I can't vent by the drug and alcohol. I can't vent by working more hours. These are the ways that used to be my go-to, but that go-to don't solve it. So it just delays it. So now I got to get back to the place where I'm able to vent, to talk about it. I need a J. I need some other guys. I need a support system. I need a mentor in my life. I need a
Yeah.
spiritual father. I need an instructor. I need someone who will allow me to vent and just take my hair down, right? All the hair I got, take it down and let me be able to release it and then say, okay, you got it off you. Let's go now. Let's go ahead and look at what we need to do. And so I need someone in my life, man. And people are sent to us. Angelic beings are sent to us. People are sent to us to assist us to get over to the other side. And a lot of times we don't allow those people to be instrumental to get to the other side. And so that to me is that whole Psalm 133. When we dwell together, there's a blessing commanded. That's the blessing right there. When we
Hmm.
break bread together, we talk, we share, we address some of our struggles and our challenges that help us get over. I may not be good in everything. I'm good at one. You may not be good at everything, but you're good at one. If we come together in our oneness and our strengths, Jay, we'll be able to sharpen each other. And that's how I see the best way to release these things.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. You made me think about this quote. And it has more to do with relating to our feelings, which as you know, with men, we have not only have a hard time expressing our feelings, but I think a lot of that leads to why we see the statistics that say men have the highest rates of completion rates of suicide compared to
Hmm.
women, right? But you made me think about a statement that said that sometimes we need people who can walk with us to feel our feelings
Yes.
and not be controlled by them,
I
right?
love
So
it.
no matter what it is, right, like we can feel whatever it is, right? Like whether it be sad or angry or whatever it is, but then not be controlled by that to lead us into different levels of different cycles of our life that we have tendencies to fall back on, as you would say. Oh man, this has been really good. My wife is texting me like, "When you gonna be done?" So I'm so this is that time where we begin to land the plane,
Okay.
as the good brother Sherman would say. So listen, I so appreciate you for being on here, and I know that this episode is going to be a blessing to a lot of men out there.
Awesome. It's grateful, man, to be on it. Is it going to be something that you can reach that I can view it?
Oh, yeah, no,
Okay.
you'll be one of the first folks to get it. Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
Well, great, man. I
I
appreciate it.
got
I'm
you.
honored. Let's do it again.